Today we're going to be doing a deck tech for Zaxara, the Exemplary. Zaxara is a Sultai 1/2/3 with Death Touch that says tap it, get 2 mana of any one colors, and whenever you cast a spell with X in its mana cost, make a 0/0 green Hydra creature token, and then put X 1/1 counters on it. So the whole point of this deck, it's pseudo budget, the price is probably around $400, $500, and the whole goal of the deck is basically to play big X spells and then have Zaxara make large tokens to beat down opponents while you get the extra value from the X spells. A benefit for playing X mana costed creatures and spells is that we can cast them with a low cost to get smaller effects when we need them, or large cost to make big Hydras and just get like the good value from it, kind of making our effects modal in a way. So starting off, this deck does have 2 infinite combos. That's not the point of the list, but it's just kind of there if we want to. So Freed from the Real and Penman's Aura, they follow the same strategy, which is basically step 1, enchant Zaxara, tap them for 2 blue, use 1 blue to untap it, and then you repeat step 2 and 3 an infinite amount of times, so you get infinite blue, and then you use that infinite blue to start tapping for other colors, so you filter your mana, and the result is now infinite colored mana. So you get a big X spell, you deck someone with like Blue Sun Zenith, or you deck yourself with Blue Sun Zenith, and you just start comboing off on people, or just kind of things like that. A lot of big X spells, a lot of big X effects. So we're getting into the spicy tech, and it really features these big cards. So starting off, Simic Ascendancy, a Simic enchantment, pay 1 Simic, put a 1/1 counter on target creature you control, but its main effect is whenever 1 or more 1/1 counters are put on a creature you control, put that many growth counters on Simic Ascendancy, and then at the beginning of your upkeep, if it has more than 20 counters on it, you win the game. You get that really spicy tech, especially since Zaxara makes 0/0s and then puts X 1/1 counters on it, where X is the spell. So it's just like a quick little way to win the game. It's not going to be like game breaking. It's not our primary strategy, but it's kind of like a little meme. Then we have Krufix, God of the Horizons. He is a 4/7 indestructible god enchantment creature for 3 in Simic, and he says, basically, he has the whole god devotion nonsense. You don't have a max hand size, and if you would lose unspent mana, that mana becomes colorless. And if you look right below him, Horizon Stone is basically the same thing. So the way this works in our favor is we go to our opponent's turns and we can start tapping our mana then to kind of store it for our next turn to keep big X spells coming, right? Next under that, we have the Ozolith. It's a little spicy tech. It's a 1 mana. Whenever a creature you control leaves the battlefield, if it had counters on it, just put those counters straight on the Ozolith. And then at the beginning of combat on your turn, if it has counters on it, you may move all of those counters from the Ozolith onto target creature. Very good tech with Simic Ascendancy. Very good tech if our Hydras die that Zaxara makes. Just overall, it'll keep our things beefy. It'll give a threat on the board at almost all times. But continuing onward, Unbound Flourishing is kind of the big highlight of the whole deck. So it says 3 mana. Whenever you cast a permanent spell that has basically X in its cost, you double the value of X. And then whenever you cast an instant or sorcery that has X in its mana cost, you just straight up copy that spell, and you can choose new targets. So it's kind of nutty, right? So we have our big X spells, like our big Hydras and things like that, which are going to be doubly big. And then we're also going to have, whenever we cast our instants and sorceries, we're going to get double the effects. Kind of nutty. So we have Parallel Lives next, and it says 4 mana. If an effect would put 1 or more tokens on the battlefield under your control, just put twice that many. It's a token doubler. So looking over at Branching Evolution, it says if 1 or more 1/1 counters will be put on a creature you control, put twice that many 1/1 counters instead. And then we have Doubling Season in between the two, which literally does Parallel Lives and Branching Effect for 1 big 5 mana enchantment. So it's going to give us double the counters, double the tokens. And that's kind of going to double up the whole deck. So going into our big X spells, we don't have many, as you can see, but these are really the only ones that I couldn't find a big category for or find a really good home for them. But going into it, we have Villainous Wealth, which costs X and Sultai for a sorcery. Target opponent exiles the top X cards of their library. You may cast any number of spells with CMC X or less from among them without paying their mana cost. Kind of really good effect in both ways. One, not only is it going to give us a big X creature with Zaxara, and kind of assume for the rest of the video that any spell with X in its mana cost will just give us a big boy from Zaxara. So even just looking at it, you may cast any number of spells with CMC X or less, which is just going to hard ramp us, hard give us value, get good big effects, draw us cards, really whatever our opponent's playing. Whichever is the best deck on the field, that's what we're going to take. And also it's important to notice that it exiles them too. So even if like we don't cast them, if they're not spells like lands, right? They just lose them. They're not getting them back. Like if they're fetch lands, they're not getting the value. Next, we have Torment of Hellfire, which is black, black, X, and it does a lot of things. It says repeat the process X times. Each opponent loses 3 unless that player sacrifices a non-land permanent or discards a card. Very good effect, right? So not only, again, do we get a big boy, but it kind of ruins our opponent's resources a lot. It either cuts off their life, it cuts off their non-lands, and it makes them discard cards. I feel like the worst case scenario is like if we're playing against a token deck, and they just say, oh, I'll just lose like 5 guys, right? That's kind of the worst case scenario. But again, you're still killing 5 creatures. And it hits every opponent. So good big value. Next, we have Profane Command, which is X and then black, black. Kind of a modal sorcery, right? So you choose 2 of them. Target player loses X life. Good drain effect. Return target creature card with converted mana cost X or less from your graveyard to the battlefield. That effect's really good to get our utility creatures, maybe not like our big Hydras or their big X-costed creatures, but we'll see later in the video about our utility creatures that really don't have X's in their costs. Target creature gets -X/-X, or up to X target creatures gain fear. So looking at it, it's a drain spell, it's a recursion spell, it's a kill spell, and it's kind of like a little combat trick in a way. So that's why I'm kind of saying this one is in this part of the list, because yes, it's removal, yes, it's recursion, and yes, it's like a combat trick, but it's kind of all of them at once. So it's kind of tough to place it. Then we have Genesis Wave. Genesis Wave is basically reverse Villainous Wealth, where Genesis Wave says, hey, it's green, 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 and X, reveal the top X cards of your library, and then you may play any permanent cards with mana cost X or less. So it kind of dodges spells, it hits permanent, so really we're getting everything but instants and sorceries on this one. But we are getting lands, which can kind of have a chance to continue us going. Let's say if we play a big X spell and we hit more lands, they're going to come in untapped, assuming they say they do. Now we have our big X creatures. So just going straight into it, Mistcutter Hydra, 1 mana X, can't be countered, haste, pro blue, and it enters with X/1/1 counters on it. So this is kind of like a unique beater. Can't be countered, pro blue, and it's haste. It's just kind of like a big threat on the field that especially blue players can't deal with. Now we have Alter Ego, which is kind of a big clone. It can't be countered just like Mistcutter Hydra. It's X and then 2 and then Simic. 0/0 enters the battlefield as a copy of any creature on the battlefield, but it can enter with X/1/1 counters. This spell's really good because it's just kind of a hard clone that we can make stronger. It's kind of just like a good, strictly better, kind of clever impersonator, kind of stunt double, for example. Going on. So if any of you have played Standard within the past couple of years, you're probably very familiar with Hydroid Colossus. It is a Simic X 0/0. When you cast it, you gain X life and draw X cards rounded down, flying trample, and it enters with the 1/1 counters. Now this is really good because we get it on cast, right? So even if we make a big Colossus, right, we're still going to get the cast trigger from Zaxara, and even if our spell does get countered, we're still drawing and we're still gaining life. So it's kind of like a big win-win anyways. Next we have Hungering Hydra. 1 and an X. When it enters the battlefield, you get X/1/1 counters with it. It can't be blocked by more than one creature, so it's kind of reverse menace. And whenever it is dealt damage, just put that many counters on it. So it's a very good blocker, it's a very good attacker, and it's just kind of like a meat shield no one really wants to deal with. So now we have Lifeblood Hydra, which is an X green 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 0/0 trampler. When it enters the battlefield, it comes in with X/1/1 counters, and then when it dies, you gain life and draw cards equal to its power. So it's kind of almost a reverse Hydroid Colossus in a way, and it's good and bad in the same sense that our opponents can kill it, but we get the value. But if they exile it, it's not so great. Either way, it's going to eat a removal, and it's really not much mana. I mean, the 3 green's going to be tough, but overall, I think the upside is way better than the downside. Next is Hooded Hydra, green green X 0/0. Enters with X/1/1 counters. When it dies, put a green 1/1 snake into play for each counter on it. The morph is kind of there, but it's not super relevant. We could always morph it if we need to, but that's kind of not really the goal of what we're trying to do with these X spells. Steelbane Hydra. Green, X, 0/0. It enters with, the 1/1 counters equal to X. But the good part about it is he says 3 mana, remove a 1/1 counter, and you just get to blow up an artifact or enchantment. So he's very good removal later on. And he's kind of, the bigger you make him, the bigger of a threat he is, and you can just kind of do this at instant speed anyways. Now we have Genesis Hydra, which is an X, green, 0/0. He enters the count with counters, just like the rest of the Hydras. But he's kind of a 3-for-1 in a way, because he says, when you cast him, reveal the top X cards of your deck, you may put only one non-land card from among them with X mana cost or less, and just put it straight into play. So the good part about him is he 3-for-1s, right? Because not only is he a big boy himself, and not only will he give you a big boy with Zaxara, but he's also going to get you like another non-land from your deck, which is kind of a cool cascade, almost like a Sunbird's Invocation effect. So now we have our card draw. Card draw, we'll start with Finale of Revelation. Sorcery, X, blue, draw X cards, just flat out. And then if X is 10 or more, instead, shuffle your graveyard into your library, and then draw X cards and untap 5 lands, and you just have no max hand size for the rest of the game, and then you just exile it. So even as a very base effect, if you can't get that 10 ability going on, it's still just a hard, hey, draw X cards. 3 mana, well, at worst, it's 3 mana, draw 1 card sorcery. Not very good, but that's, again, the worst case scenario. Best case scenario, you kind of ramp it up, and you get X, you get a little pseudo emblem, untap 5 lands for kind of half the cost. It's just a good card overall. Exiling, it's not super relevant. Pull for Tomorrow is a very good instant, blue, X. Instant, just draw X cards and discard a card. So it's kind of a little combat trick in a way, because you get a little big Hydra, and then you just draw a ton of cards. And kind of discarding one isn't really a big deal, unless, like, the worst case scenario is you play blue and 0, and then you just basically discard a card. Not really a good idea, but that's the worst case scenario. Say you get Mind Slavered. Now we have Blue Sun Zenith. Blue Sun Zenith is like a very good card to kind of kill opponents with in a way, assuming you can get like infinite mana with the little auras. Kind of if you get infinite mana with him anyway, you're most likely to win, but Blue Sun is definitely like an instant kill to him. So just target player draws X cards, and then you just shuffle Blue Suns right into your deck. Easy as that. Slightly better. I'd say slightly better than Finale of Revelation. But again, it's kind of different because one's an instant, one's a sorcery, they just kind of do different effects overall. But either way, it's a good card draw engine. So Garruk's Uprising. It's 3 mana enchantment. When it enters the battlefield, if you control a creature with power 4 or greater, draw a card. Your creatures have trample, and whenever a creature with power 4 or greater enters the battlefield, you just draw a card. So he's very good because he hits token creatures. So when you make a big X creature with Zaxara, right, you're just going to draw a card. Plus he's going to give them all trample, and even if you draw it late game, if you do have a 4/4, he is essentially a redraw. Now Guardian Project's kind of a little bit better. It's 4 mana, and he says whenever a non-token creature enters the battlefield, you just draw a card in EDH, because you're not going to have the cards with the same names. So now we have our interaction and removal section. So starting off Voracious Hydra, it's a 0/1 X green with trample. He does the whole Hydra X counter thing, and then when he enters, you can either double him or you can make him fight a creature. So I put him in here because you're most likely going to want to fight a creature with him, because you can just dump all your mana into him and then have him kill something. Or even if you don't choose to do that, you can just dump all your mana into him and then make him super big. So now we have Assassin's Trophy. It speaks for itself. It's just Golgari, instant, destroy target permanent an opponent controls, and then they just get a basic. Not really a big deal, especially like, hey, you're probably going to kill something way worse than whatever basic they're going to get. Now we have Spellburst. I think it's a very unique spell. So the reason I'm running it is mainly because of the X cost, but also because of the buyback, right? As you'll see later, this deck has a few things that can untap lands, and just being able to get a creature and counter a spell, specifically, that does have buyback, is very good. This is also another card, for example, with Zaxara that goes infinite. Basically says, hey, let's say you don't have a kill on board, but now your opponents can't play spells for the rest of the game. That's kind of it, right? Because you just cast it, you buy it back. Next is Thassa's Intervention. It's a part of the removal because it says, hey, counter target spell unless its controller pays X. But it also is very good, kind of card advantage in a way. where it says look at the top X cards of your deck and then put 2 of them into your hand, right? So you can pay a ton into it, get a dummy big creature, and then just kind of get the card advantage from it. Just modal spells are good in general, I think. Next, 2, we kind of have classics. So it's Beast Within, just destroy target permanent. They get a 3/3. Kind of the same deal as Assassin's Trophy. I think Assassin's Trophy is a little bit better. But anyways, nonetheless, Counterspell, just classic counter a spell. It's just like one of the staples. Same with Cyclonic Rift. Return, basically 7 mana, one-sided board wipe. Can't really go wrong with it. Now we have Corrosive Grip. Not many people run Corrosive Grip, but it is, I think, a good staple. So 3 mana, split second, which means they just can't respond with it. They can't respond to the spell unless they have like a mana ability, right? So let's say an opponent cracks a Sensei's Divining Top or something like that. You can just destroy it in response, or someone's going to have a big effect with one of their other artifacts or enchantments like a Metalworker or any other combo piece kind of like that. You can just destroy it in response. Now we have Condescend. Condescend is a little more, I guess, specific version of Spellburst. So it's just counter target spell unless its controller pays X, and then just scry 2. So good card advantage, good Hydra making, just good overall. So Curse of the Swine, kind of another unique removal. Blue, X, exile X target creatures, and then they just each make a 2/2 boar, which is a very weird but selective board wipe that I think doesn't have a home in many decks, but it for sure does have a home in this deck, especially with that X cost. So now we have our value utility creatures, right? Corpsejack Menace, if one or more 1/1 counters will be placed on a creature you control, you get twice that many. So basically, whenever one of our Hydras come in or anything like that, they're going to be doubly big. Next is Nyx Bloom Ancient. We just get triple mana. Tripling mana when we're trying to play super big spells, kind of very, very good. Next is Seedborn Muse, right? Untap all permanents you control during each player's untap step. This creature is very good, especially since it lets us kind of like dump all of our mana and do whatever on our opponent's turns, really without a consequence unless it kind of dies. But we're not really going to worry about that. It's going to be able to keep our instance very big. It's going to be able to let us just dump however much mana we want to on our turn because, hey, it's just all going to untap anyways. Plus, it's kind of good for combat because it's going to make you untap all your creatures. Next, we have Colonian Hydra. It is a 5-mana 0/0 trampler, enters with 4 1/1 counters, and then whenever he attacks, just flat out double the amount of 1/1 counters on each creature you control. So even just as he is, he's a 5-mana 4/4 with trample. That's an okay rate, but then when he attacks, he's just going to be an 8/8 trample. That's going to double up all your other boys. Next, we have Evolution Sage. Kind of a weird include, I decided, but I think the deck would really profit with it because of the amount of 1/1 counters and stuff like that we are going to have. So Evolution Sage just says 3 mana, 3/2, whenever a land enters the battlefield under your control, proliferate. So it's kind of just going to say, hey, whenever a land enters the battlefield, put a 1/1 counter on everything you have. Make all your boys a little bit stronger. So Deepglow Skate is kind of a more unique card. It's kind of like a combat trick in a way, but before combat. So he's going to enter the battlefield, and he's going to double literally all your creatures that have any amount of X in it, because most likely they're going to be our Hydras, and they're going to be our creatures that are made with Zaxara. So they're going to get doubly big, and a lot of them have trample anyways. Plus, not only that, he can hit Planeswalkers, right? And he can also be kind of political with your opponents, saying like, hey, I'll double up counters on this if you do this. Anyway, that's more meta for your play group, but mine, we play a good amount of politics. Next is Herald of the Stream. Flat out, he's not a Hydra or anything like that, but he does say creatures you control with a 1/1 counter on them can't be blocked. And guess what? All of our Hydras have 1/1 counters on them, and pretty much most of our creatures have 1/1 counters on them. And making them all unblockable, very good. So next we have Gargos, the Vicious Watcher. He has a weird mana cost 3, and then green, Vigilance, 8/7. But we're running him because he says our Hydras cost 4 less. And we're not really looking at our creature token Hydras, but more or less our X-costed Hydras. Even Colonian Hydra, for example, that you can see above, will make it just cost 2 mana for a 4/4 trampler. But he's basically going to be a big cost reducer that's going to be able to make our X spells even greater. And then if we do happen to target him, he's just going to fight a creature, and an 8/7 is usually not going to lose a fight. Next we have our rocks and ramp. So Chromatic Orrery is a big artifact starting off. You may spend mana though it was of any color, and you can tap it to get 5 mana, which is basically all going to be considered colored. And then you can also just pay 5 mana to just kind of draw 3 cards. Kind of a good rate. But overall, it's just kind of there because tapping for 5 and also fixing colors in a 3-color deck is going to be very good for us, especially late game when we're going to be trying to cast as big spells as we can. Thought Vessel, 2 mana, you have no max hand size, tap for a colorless. It's a good rock, but it's also there because, hey, we're going to be drawing probably a really good amount of cards with this, especially with our big X effects like Blue Sun Zenith, with Finale of Revelation, and with Pull From Tomorrow. So we're going to kind of want to be able to have a big hand size or not be able to at least get rid of it. Great Henge is a 9 mana artifact that's never going to cost 9. It says tap, get 2, gain 2, and then whenever a non-token enters the battlefield, you just put a 1/1 counter on it and draw a card. So let's just kind of round it out and say that the Great Henge is going to cost us 4 mana. That's going to get 2 mana back and gain us life. That's also going to make our non-tokens enter stronger and draw us cards. So he's kind of a Guardian Project built in with 1/1 counters. That's also a rock. It's just overall a super, super nutty card. Next we have Farseek, just a good amount of ramp. Says green 1, search your library for a Plains, Island, Swamp, or Mountain card, and then put it on the battlefield tapped. This is always going to hit one of our shock lands, as we will see later. It's just going to get our duels out. So next we have Animist Awakening, which is a green and X, reveal the top X cards of your library, put all lands from among them onto the battlefield tapped, and then just the rest on the bottom in a random order. But if we have Spell Mastery, they're basically all going to enter untapped, which is very good, kind of in a Genesis wave effect where it kind of doesn't always cost what it does, because let's say we spend, let's say 6 mana, X is 5, right? Even if we get like 1 or 2 land, right, that are going to enter untapped assumingly, or even if they do enter tapped, it's still a good rate. So again, going to the point, let's say X is 5 and we get 1 or 2 land, then really this 6-costed spell really costs like 4 or 5, which is going to be a good cost reducer at the very least. Skyclave Relic, 3 mana, kicker 3, just an indestructible artifact that taps for 1 mana of any color, and if it's kicked, you get 2 more of them that enter tapped. I think Skyclave Relic is kind of a strictly better version of Darksteel Ingot, and Darksteel Ingot is also already a very good card. So it's kind of, hey, pay 3 mana, get a Darksteel Ingot, or you can pay 6 mana to get 3 Darksteel Ingots. Kind of the way you got to look at Skyclave Relic. Commander Sphere, 3 mana, get 1 mana of any color, sacrifice it, draw a card. Super simple. Next is Soul Ring, 1 mana artifact, get 2 mana. You kind of can't run a deck without it. Love Soul Ring to the moon and back. Arcane Signet's next, 2 mana, just get 1 mana that your commander could produce. It's just a better Felwar Stone, and Felwar Stone is also very good. Next we have Kodama's Reach and Cultivate. We don't have any arcane nonsense, so we're not really going to worry about splicing on the arcane. I don't really think anyone ever does. But they both say search your deck for up to 2 basic lands, put 1 in your hand, 1 into play tapped. Just good ramp, just always good to have it around. So now we kind of have our combat tricks and shenanigans. So looking at it, Triumph of the Horde, kind of almost an auto-include in almost basically any battle cruiser deck. Triumph of the Horde's 4 mana, sorcery. Until end of turn, creatures you control get trample, +1/+1, and infect. Again, if you're not familiar with infect, you only need 10 infect damage to a player before they lose the game. And most likely, we're making a lot of big boys with Zaxara anyway, and they already have trample, so just making them stronger and trample, just swinging in and killing them. Easy, easy win. So next we have Inspiring Call, a very unique card, 3 mana instant, draw a card for each creature you control with a 1/1 counter on it, which is virtually about 90% of our creatures, other than the other ones that really just aren't Hydras. And then more importantly, they gain indestructible until end of turn. So in my opinion for our deck, it is a better heroic intervention, in a way. In a way, yes, it doesn't give hexproof, but I think we're basically paying 1 extra mana to draw cards. So let's say someone like nukes, right? Or someone plays a Wrath of God. Yeah, Heroic Intervention and Inspiring Call are going to have the same effect, but Inspiring Call is at least going to keep a lot of our creatures alive, and it's going to draw more cards. Next is Finale of Devastation. Search your library and or grave for a creature card with CMC X or less and just put it onto the battlefield. If you search your library this way, shuffle it. If X is 10 or more, creatures you control get +X in haste. So at the very worst, it's a Green Sun Zenith. A one more costed Green Sun Zenith, right? At the very best, you kind of get whatever creature you want from your deck, and your creatures get basically +10/+10 until end of turn in haste. And if your creature's getting +10/+10 doesn't end the game, then you're not playing Magic right. So now we have our Planeswalkers and Miscellaneous cards, right? So going into our Planeswalkers right away, we have Nissa's Sword of Elements with an extra mana cost and Simic. She comes in with X, so at the very least you just pay 3 mana. You can plus her to Scry 2. You can 0 her to look at the top card of your library. If it's a land or creature with CMC basically equal to the amount of counters on her, you can just put it onto the battlefield. And not so relevant, but -6, untap up to 2 target lands you control. They become 5/5 creatures with flying and haste, and they're still lands. So kind of quick little extra mana, kind of quick beaters, which is essentially 10 damage in the air if you get to it. So Kiora, Behemoth Beckoner, 3 mana. Whenever a creature with power 4 or greater enters the battlefield under your control, draw a card. Kind of the same exact concept as Garruk's Uprising, but we can use it to untap target permanents on our turns. That's untapping a rock, like say Chromatic Orrery, or it's untapping lands, or it's untapping creatures. Overall, it's just good value. Then we have a Wilderness Reclamation, which is essentially a baby version of Seedborn Muse, where it's going to untap all of our lands at the end step. So basically, it's going to let us just dump all the mana we possibly can into our X spells, and then just have them untap as if we never even took a turn. Bala Ged Recovery, kind of a more unique card. 3 mana sorcery, return target card from your grave to your hand, and then if you don't want to do that, you can flip it to the backside. It's a land that enters tapped and taps for a green. So it's kind of a good recursion a little bit, and it's also kind of ramp if we need it, but it's always a good modal spell. Next is Lightning Greaves. Usually we're probably going to want to put that on Zaxara, just basically so no one will kill her, because Zaxara is always going to ramp us a little bit, giving it haste and shroud so it can tap immediately if it dies or comes back. Or even if we just play like a big Hydra and we want to swing with it, Lightning Greaves is always there. Going into our lands, we have our tri-lands. We don't have very many, so we do have Path of Ancestry. It enters tapped, and we can tap it for basically any of Zaxara's colors. And then when we do use it to cast a Hydra, we're going to scry 1. So kind of good card advantage. We do have a good amount of Hydras in this deck. And either way, it's just essentially a tri-land that's going to enter tap that sometimes scries us 1. Command Tower is Command Tower. Love it. Just basically better than a duel, I'd say, in Commander. Opulent Palace just enters tapped, and it taps for Sultai. Zagoth Triome, just straight up strictly better Opulent Palace. It is a Swamp Forest Island, so you can get it with Farseek and effects like that. It does enter tapped, but if you do get it late game and you don't want it, you can always just cycle it away for 3 mana. So for our dual lands, we're running 1 of each Temple, 1 of each Check, and 1 of each Shock. This is kind of there to keep our mana consistent. The Scry lands are always going to be good for card advantage, and the Watery Graves and the Shock lands, Overgrown Tombs, Breeding Pool, they're always going to be good fetchable targets for Farseek and other effects like that. Check lands, I think, are just very good. They're not quite budget. They're not really like super competitive or expensive lands. They're just kind of there to keep your mana consistent, and they'll most likely enter untapped. Now we have our utility lands. We got Karn's Bastion, taps for a colorless. Pay 4 mana, tap it, Proliferate, which is basically just going to put a 1/1 counter on all of our Hydras as a little combat trick almost. Or we can just do it at someone's end step. Or even if we have cards like Seedborn Muse or Wilderness Reclamation, we could start doing it every turn. Bojuka Bog, it's just going to enter. A quick way to exile an opponent's graveyard, especially if they're playing any kind of Reanimator or things like that, self-mill combo, whatever you got. Bojuka Bog's always going to help deal with it. Temple of the False God's going to tap to give us 2 colors to our mana pool. Again, we're kind of going to be a little bit of a big mana deck. Obviously, the bigger X spells we can cast, the better. And Temple of the False God's just going to help us get there a little bit faster. And just like kind of the same reason we're running Thought Vessel, we're running Reliquary Tower because tapping for a colorless is good, yes. But the fact that we have no max hand size for the rest of the game is going to be very helpful for us. So for our basics, we have 9 forests, 5 islands, and 4 swamps. If you look at our little graph in the top right, we have a lot of green cards, right? But a lot of those green cards are going to be multicolored. And a lot of our lands that we do have are going to tap for more than just one color. The tapped out doesn't really account for that. Now, the tricky thing when looking at this deck is if you look at the average converted mana cost. Now, it says our average converted mana cost is 2, and for the most part it is, technically speaking, but that's just kind of because all our spells are blue, blue X or green, green X or 1 and an X or anything like that. So it's not super accurate, and that's kind of one of the blessings of the deck is we get to pick our own average CMC. Obviously, we want it to be higher, but even just casting like X is 3 or X is 4 is still better than not casting X as anything at all. Thank you guys for watching. I really hope you liked the video. Please remember to subscribe, like the video, and comment. And I really appreciate all the support you guys have been giving me. I love making videos like this. And if you want me to make another Commander or any more videos like this, just let me know in the comments below. I appreciate the watch. Please subscribe. And I'll see you next time. Have a good day.